welcome to What It Takes. I'm Tom Landon. My guest today has arguably one of the coolest jobs around. As head of the Virginia Film Office, Andy Edmunds spends each day making sure that producers in Hollywood and beyond consider shooting their films in the Commonwealth. While it sounds a little glamorous and can be, Andy spends a huge amount of his time on things like tax credits designed to entice studios to spend potentially hundreds of millions of dollars here, and legal reviews, and working to make sure that if a film is going to be made here, that the local communities are prepared and able to provide all of the infrastructure needs that come with the arrival of hundreds of people to an area. Andy's driven movie stars and big-name directors all over Virginia, and his efforts have paid off, as we'll learn in a minute. He's worked with Spielberg, Clint Eastwood, and other titans of the industry. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Tom, for having me.
Well, thank you for making the drive from Richmond. I know you spend a lot of time in the vehicle as you're driving people around and looking for locations and all of those things. But I always like to start by just saying, how did you get to where you are today? What's your background and what led you to your work?
Born and raised in Virginia, but got into the film industry through music, basically. I wanted to be a rock star. Ever since I was 13 years old, I was a little hotshot guitar player. My mother went to Juilliard, my father went to Columbia, so it was either be a lawyer or go into the arts. And I chose, of course, the easy path of being an artist, right? So I played music for a long time, and in that time I traveled all over the state, so I knew the state pretty well as a traveling musician. So that just went into my memory bank there of knowing the state pretty well. But then I did a music video in the 1980s. It was on MTV, back in the days of spandex and big hair, Tom, of which I had neither. But we did this music video, produced it professionally with a great director out of Richmond named John Parks. And it was a concept for a song I had for this music video, and we produced it. And in that process, I became fascinated with the production process and what it took to create this 4-minute piece of art by assembling all these interesting, talented people together in a team. It almost became like a football team or a military maneuver that you went through this suffering and stress of creating this art project together. And then when it was over, everybody just hugged and was emotionally connected. And I just really loved that process of being in an artistic endeavor together with people. So then just for practical purposes after that, being a musician, struggling along, I was fascinated with production. So I started getting daytime employment in production and would play music at night. And little by little, I did more and more production during the day. And just as life transpired, I just found myself falling more into production as a way to build a career, especially when we had our first child. I said, I need a job with health insurance, right? So I was playing music, but I knew the folks at the film office then. I developed a reputation in the industry. So I first went to Rita McClinney, who was the director of the film office at the time, and said, look, I want to help you convert the locations library to digital format. This was in about 1997. And everybody said, what's that, right? I'm like, well, everything's got to go digital. So I offered to work for free at the film office. And this is my advice to young interns I talk to sometime. Find something you love, find a mentor you respect, and just offer to work for free to be in that ecosystem. And unfortunately, she wouldn't allow me to work for free. She gave me a job, and she actually allowed me to kind of write my job description. So I became the location manager for the Virginia Film Office. First task was to convert this library of 4,000 locations of images all around the state into a digital format, right? So we hooked up with Virginia Tech, and we had them scan thousands and thousands of photographs into this digital library where for the first time you could search Red Barn by a pond, White Farmhouse, and put in this data into this database, and all of a sudden the images would pop up. It was like magic. I know it seems so small now, but it was a magical thing. So it changed the whole process of being able to fulfill an artist's need when they were looking for locations, to be able to provide the plethora of amazing locations we had in Virginia right at your fingertips, and use that as a edge, because we were one of the first states to have that technological edge in competing at that time.
So people could look without having to really even call your office necessarily or visit. As long as they knew it was there, they could find that Red Barn or the factory they needed or whatever it was.
Once it went online, we were doing it internally, but yeah, that first magical moment when I was first able to talk to a client in real time and we could be at our computers and both look at images at the same time was a groundbreaking thing, because we used to send just FedEx boxes of images, to California overnight. and try to be the first one to the table with the best options. And that was the competitive pathway we were always on with the clients to try to get them to come to Virginia. Was like, Virginia's got the best options. We're the first ones at the table. We're in the conversation, developing the relationship. So it started as this location, providing great locations in that competitive pathway. But now over the years, as you described, it's evolved from this location endeavor to providing the logistical assets we have of crew and other assets we have, to then, incentives to try to attract the work, because it became very competitive in the 90s. Canada decided to try to build a film industry, right? So they created this nationwide incentive, tax credit, and when you combine that with the exchange rate, you could basically create a movie in Canada for 50% off. A $10 million movie you could make for $5 million. So all of a sudden there was a really loud sucking sound of all the production and movie of the week production in the United States went to Canada, right? And all that industry was built out of the government deciding to really double down to try to build an industry. And now they've built an amazing industry in Canada. Then some other states, or some states decided to get into the incentive effort to try to attract this work back to the United States, starting in Louisiana and Georgia and New Mexico. But the way I like to tee it up now, Tom, is to use this example of where we are today. And that when I would tell my young kids, right, that when I was their age, when they were younger, that we only had 3 or 4 television channels to choose from, and you actually had to get up from your chair and go to the big box and turn the knob to actually select the channels. And they would look at me like I was an alien from another planet, right? And of course they would say, well, why didn't you go to the internet, was their first answer. But now when you think about it, all the hundreds of cable channels we all have, the dozens and dozens and dozens of streaming platforms that we have, what that has created is a global demand for content to fill up all these platforms. And the creation of that content, at the end of the day, it's a manufacturing process, right? It doesn't sound sexy, doesn't sound glamorous, but these are trade jobs, these are vocational jobs. It's not a Hollywood industry. I like to say it's about a job for Holly Smith. She's a single mom. She works as a makeup and hair artist or a seamstress working on one of these shows. You have carpenters, electricians, technical positions with digital assets, and all the way to artists and writers and actors and drivers and everything in between. As you know, Tom, moving a movie production around is like moving a circus. It's just
It really is the modern day circus, right? And all of the things that come from that, and these are good jobs. They tend to, many of them are union jobs. But in order to sustain that, in order to have the infrastructure there where you have enough carpenters, you have enough lighting people, you've got to continuously have productions going on in the state, right?
That's right. You have to keep feeding the machine. You can't make it on just a couple of big projects per year, because it really is like a chicken or the egg scenario. It's like, how do you have the crew and infrastructure without having the work to keep them occupied? And how do you get the work unless you have enough crew to satisfy the client when they're coming in? So we feel that today, really the biggest opportunity is in the episodic content lane, right? With limited series or series work. And over the last probably 7 or 8 years, we've had some great episodic projects that have come to Virginia and just spent an enormous amount of money. We had 4 seasons of a television show called Turn, Washington Spies for AMC. And they spent about $130 million in Virginia over that time. And not only that, we did a unique thing, because if we were using the people's money to try to induce and attract this work to Virginia, we approached AMC when we were putting the deal together and said, look, you guys have cameras, you have talent. While you're here producing the show, why don't you produce a commercial for Virginia tourism to encourage people to come to Virginia and learn about historical information in Virginia, and run this commercial on your platforms as part of our deal. And at first they said, well, we've never really done that. I said, well, if you want incentives to be sustainable and have the maximum ROI for us, let's try to do a deal like this. So they did, and they produced a commercial for Virginia tourism, great imagery of Colonial Williamsburg and other assets around the state. And they broadcast it 200 times across their platform of AMC and Sundance Channel. And this was the only national television advertising we had for Virginia tourism, was through our relationship with film.
Yeah, and You alluded to the fact there are those who, is this a function of government, right? Why would government be doing this? You mentioned a number for one series. What do you think? I'm sure you know this number, but is there a general ballpark figure of like what your work and what the film industry and television industry brings into Virginia or spends in Virginia in the course of a year?
Well, the industry as a whole in Virginia is about $700 million a year. So this includes post-production facilities from Northern Virginia to out here in Roanoke and your facility here and all the different production people that work here and commercial work. And so it's about $700 million a year. So it's a big industry. There's 5,400 people in Virginia today employed in production, which is in fact larger than the coal industry in Virginia. People may not realize that. But the average wage on a movie set is about $85,000 a year. As you mentioned, people that have full benefits, health insurance, pension. So these are really good paying jobs, technical jobs that are transferable skills that can go to many other areas. And one of the things that we try to target now, which is interesting, is that opportunities for veterans, right? There's no one that understands the hierarchy of a movie set better than a veteran.
Right, a director is a general and yeah.
Exactly. So for new career pathways, we have a program called Vets on Sets that we offer production assistance training with free tuition to vets on sets through our PA training program that we've done in partnership with the community college system. Now, we ran that program for several years, but now we have it on hold because we just do not have enough fuel in the tank to produce the workflow to justify. We will train these kids in production assistants, and then they'll move to Georgia where there's a more robust incentive program and where more work is happening. So that's an issue right now. We feel that if we had more fuel in the tank to bring more work, we could justify this training. For example, there are 25 colleges and universities around the state right now that have film and media programs, and these kids want to be in this lane. They want to be storytellers. They want to be producers. They want to be behind the scenes as well. But once they go through these programs at Virginia colleges, they move to where the work is.
They leave, which is always that flight issue. And you alluded to it a little bit. We talk a lot on this program about STEM and, technology, and so much of the industry is not just, a man or woman with a camera and a director. There's so much goes on, even in a place like here, Blue Ridge PBS, where, we spend a lot of time on animation and digital editing and other things that we might not think of as being a STEM career, but you really have to understand technology, don't you?
Absolutely. And what's fascinating now is in the space of virtual reality, augmented reality, XR, MR. We're kind of at the beginning of that. I'd say we're like where the personal computer was in 1983. And we don't know where storytelling is going to go and how you will experience what we now experience as going to a cinema, right? That we will actually, in a few years, be in the story with the actors and able to direct based on our choices where that story could go. So it's a new way and a new challenge of how to write story within that three-dimensional space that's going to be interesting. In Virginia, we should be leaders in that lane as well. I mean, we have such great technical capabilities at all of our colleges and universities to combine that capability with writing, with our English departments, with economic development opportunity, and with tourism. A great example, once again, Tom, of like film tourism is right out here in the area with Dirty Dancing, right? That was filmed out at Mountain Lake Resort 35 years ago. Now, as a tourism opportunity, we've been milking that for 35 years. There have been 3 or 4 different offshoot shows, and people still visit Mountain Lake Resort just to be where, they were.
Patrick Swayze.
Patrick Swayze.
Yeah, right. So you alluded to Georgia and some of the other states in our area. What are who are your big competitors, and where do we stack up in terms of the incentives and the infrastructure for filmmaking and video?
I'll tell you exactly where we stack up, and it's tough. In Georgia, they have a transferable tax credit, and last year they paid out almost $1 billion in tax credits to attract about $4 billion worth of spending. Now, these incentives, the clients don't get a dime until they've spent an audited dollar. So these are performance-based incentives. So they have $1 billion. We have about $10 million a year versus $1 billion. Therefore, the infrastructure they've built in Georgia right now, they have over 105 sound stages, which are, big boxes larger than this. They're about 30,000 square feet that you can build sets and produce content. So they have over 100 sound stages. We don't have one purpose-built sound stage of that scale in Virginia right now.
And yet I know you've been creative. I was in Sandston when the Dopesick production was going on and saw the amount of space, but that was just in a big industrial park, wasn't it?
Big warehouse, and that's always our hunt when a big show comes into town or into Virginia, is to find a warehouse that will be satisfactory, for the industry. Now, the needs of the industry are, pretty demanding, that it's really hard to find a big warehouse that is not near a flight path or a railroad track, because usually you put.
And they don't want to have to retrofit a place. They don't want to have to customize a place. They want to be able to walk in, plug in, have restroom facilities, have everything that they need, right?
Exactly. And they want everything right next to a Starbucks, if possible. Anyway, very demanding. But, look, there's a case that could be said, and there's always a debate about incentives, right? And should we, as the people of Virginia and our treasure and our tax money, go to buy these jobs, right? And it's a reasonable case to have that position. But the studies that we've shown have shown that over the last 12 years, for every dollar in film incentives we've put in, has returned about $11 to the economy. So that's overall GDP, economic output for the economy. So that's about 11 to 1. But it does have a revenue cost. So the actual tax revenue will be less. It costs us a little bit of money in tax revenue, but look what it does and the jobs that it creates. And for example, in Homeland, we did season 7 of Homeland. On their vendor list, they had 350 Virginia small businesses as vendors on their vendor list, right? So what kind of industry can you induce to bring here that will have an impact on tourism, on good technical jobs, on supporting small businesses in multiple categories? They do everything from buying paper clips to renting helicopters, right? To then having a tourism asset at the end where people will come visit the sites where Lincoln was filmed, come visit the turn sites, follow the Harriet Tubman Trail, Yeah,
I want to talk, but we've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we talk about some of those films, because I know that's interesting. Right now, I think Raymond and Ray is a film that is either just coming out or about to come out, right?
Yep.
And that's Ethan Hawke, I believe, is one of the actors in that, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And also The Good Lord Bird, which is an Ethan Hawke project. So tell me about just some of the big projects that have happened in the last couple of years and what your role it was in that.
Well, obviously the relationship with Ethan Hawke was amazing. We did The Good Lord Bird here, and his performance as John Brown was just stunning. And he loved Virginia. So when Raymond and Ray came around, and that really came through a personal relationship of a producer named Julie Lynn, who went to UVA. I'm on the board of the Virginia Film Festival with Julie. So we've been trying for about 12 or 15 years to find a project that she could bring here. She's a very well-known producer. But the incentive was never quite lining up because of our limited pool. And so when this show came along, they were seriously considering going to Ohio. But Julie really wanted to bring it here, so we worked really hard and were able to work with Apple to be able to delay some of the payment of the incentive, and she was willing to because of her heart being in Virginia. And then lining up with Ethan, who said, "Oh, I love Virginia. I'd love to come to Virginia." So they came and produced it, and Rodrigo Garcia, amazing director. And it's a fun film. It's on Apple right now, and in some limited theatrical release as well. But it's kind of a dysfunctional family movie. Their hook is they put fun back in dysfunctional family, so everyone should check it out.
Some of the other ones on the list, Wonder Woman 1984. I admit, I try to keep up with this stuff. I didn't know that was shot in Virginia.
Well, there was part of it, and that's an interesting story because they needed a mall, right, for the opening scene. I don't know if you've seen the film, but the opening scene is this huge mall from the 80s, right? So there was a mall right outside of Washington, Landmark Mall, that was empty. And we knew they were going to be in D.C. They had to be in D.C. So their math was, did they build a fake mall in the U.K. where they were filming most of the movie, or did they come shoot a practical mall and adapt it? So they had to do the math between those two scenarios. They knew they had to come to Washington to shoot on Pennsylvania Avenue and all the stunts they did, but did they use a practical mall or did they build the set in the UK? So since we had this mall, we knew we were kind of in the driver's seat. And so we helped them work out access to the mall. And they, of course, wanted a huge incentive, to come. And we're like, we don't have enough, but we've got the mall. We know you need the mall. So we give them a really tiny little bit to secure the mall and secure the deal. But we said, as part of our deal, we said, look, you've got a mall. Why don't you put a welcome center in the mall with Virginia's for Lovers branding in the mall, in the movie, which would be huge product placement for Virginia tourism, right? And so they agreed to it, said, okay, we'll come up with some way. Then one day they called and said, look, to satisfy this requirement for the deal, the director, Patty Jenkins, who's from Northern Virginia, had an idea, and they ran it by me. They said, what if Wonder Woman takes the bad guy in the opening scene in the mall and throws the bad guy through a big 6-foot drum that has the Virginia's for Lovers logo on the drum? Would that be okay? I said, yeah, that'll be fine, because that's just huge. It won't get cut from the movie. So then I pushed it a little farther, though, and I said, look, after you're done with the drum, can we have the drum? They said, yeah, fine. So we kept the drum. We reskinned it with the Virginia's for Lovers logo on it from the 80s. And then we set it up in Alexandria in a storefront with posters of Wonder Woman so people could come by and Instagram next to the drum. And so we created a whole PR thing around the drum and the fact that the drum was in the movie. And some people say that product placement of the Virginia's for Lovers brand in that movie was worth probably $10 million.
Because of all the millions of people that would go to see a Wonder Woman movie. I know that the last couple of years have been tough for everybody in the film industry. How, during COVID, how did that impact anything that was going on during that time?
This brings me to Dopesick.
Oh, well.
So, as you know, I've been following Beth Macy and her writing as a talented writer for so long, and she has Factory Man, the book that I love, that I knew had been optioned to HBO. So I've been tracking that book for a long time, hoping it would turn into a miniseries we could film in Virginia. And then that didn't happen, but then all of a sudden, Dopesick, I read Dopesick, and it came along, and through my friends that had done Homeland, which was Fox 21, it all came around in a circle, and they said, look, this Dopesick project looks like it's going to get some traction. Do you think we could make the incentive thing work and try to work out all that? In the meantime, Beth is, as you know, working on the scenes, like would love to, gotta film it in Virginia, right? And so we go to scout on the project. So I'm with Danny Strong and someone from Fox 21, and I'm scouting around locations in Southwest Virginia, and we're out near Covington and Clifton Forge, and we go to what we call the last meal in Lexington on March 13th, 2020. We have this great meal in Lexington, and then all of a sudden the next day, and they decided, we really love Virginia, we think this is gonna be a great place to make the show. And the next day is when everything shut down. And so we didn't know what was gonna happen. The show went away. I was very heartbroken for our industry that the show might not go into production. And then little by little, everybody went back into their corners. And then I knew the production industry would figure out how to operate in this space, because making a movie is like disaster management anyway, right? You have to handle so many different things. So sure enough, the unions got together and figured out how to operate safely with masking and bubbles within bubbles and zones, and they figured out a safe way to execute production. So then finally, Dopesick got back underway, as you know, and just it's so consequential when you're able to work on a project that has impact and meaning beyond the jobs and what it means for our industry, but really has a cultural impact on people's perspectives about important issues facing our nation. And certainly the book and this show has done so much to give people a different point of view about addiction and everything. So I love it when there's a show that has the benefit of the economic impact, but especially when it has more meaning. And in my career, I've been so fortunate to work on so many different projects that have had that dual special meaning to me. So I'm just really lucky in that regard.
And I'll just do my standard disclaimer when my wife's name comes up. So I am married to the author of Dopesick. So, but I didn't
tell her to keep writing
because of that.
Tell her to keep writing. We need another movie.
We've got just a couple minutes left, but I don't want to go away without talking briefly, at least, about the Virginia Production Alliance. What is it, and how do people find out more?
So the VPA, Virginia Production Alliance, that is the trade association that people join. And that's the advocacy group that will really is able to work with legislators and other people in the industry to advocate for incentives, and also a place where you can go and network with people to meet people that are in your same mindset of wanting to tell stories and make films and work together. You know, this business, like so many businesses, is about relationships. So through the VPA, we think you can make relationships if you're interested in this industry to maybe make your own movie.
Right, and that leads me to just, and I won't even give you time to respond here, but the Virginia Film Festival is something that you are associated with, and there's so much great work going on in the state, and you know, all I would say is that you know, if you'd like to learn more about the Film Office, how to get involved, I highly recommend a visit to their website at film.virginia.org. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.